To come and read a short story. Thank you. I taught a writing class once that Herschel was in, and he stood up in the middle of class one day and played us a song on his ukulele. So I think it's probably appropriate that he have me stand up here in the middle of a bunch of musicians and read a story. Thank you, Herschel, for inviting me, and thank you, everyone, for coming to Hirschfest. This story is called The Not Too Distant Future. Sometime late in middle age, I should say also that I was going for a shorter story, which means we didn't necessarily get the happiest one, so I'm sorry about that. Okay, The Not Too Distant Future. Sometime late in middle age, Joel found himself alone, more alone than he'd been in decades. Barbara was gone. After the last few particularly bad years, she'd run off with a marriage counselor. Not their marriage counselor. He and Barbara had never used one, preferring passive aggression to therapy. But instead, a real prize winner that she'd met at a hotel bar during some conference somewhere. A man not so wealthy as Joel, but richer, it seemed, in empathy. The girls were gone, Justine at university in Idaho, and Kristen running around somewhere in Southern California, probably snorting drugs and giving hand jobs to record producers. Barbara had managed to spin the divorce in such a manner that the girls didn't telephone. This was no surprise, as she'd always been good at making Joel the villain. In fresher days, Joel and his brother had founded a company. Managing its escalating success kept Joel busy for the better part of many, many years, especially those that followed his brother's death. Then, one day, not long after his divorce, the board of directors announced that they intended to liquidate his position, and everything came to a halt. He considered fighting, but even his lawyer advised him to accept the rather comfortable severance package offered. "They've got you in the corner," he said. "You've no choice but to give in." An odd thing happened then. There had been an anger growing in Joel, but with this resolution, the anger slipped away, as if it had gone missing in a strange wood, stumbled on the rocks somewhere, and hit its head and drowned. Joel sat around, in his car, at a coffee shop, at a bar, at several more bars, in his house, and waited for the anger to come back. It did not. He wondered if deep down he were beatific and calm after all. Such had long been the impression of himself he had endeavored to project to the world. The house, he'd been able to keep it during the divorce due to Barbara's general disinterest, was big, and it was empty, and when he was inside it, Joel had nothing to do. Eventually, he was inside it most of the time. During the company years, he'd risen at 4:30 every morning to exercise, stationary bike, light weights, swimming pool, before heading to the office. It was not hard to ditch the routine. On good days, he slept until 10, breakfast, and then the paper. He spent the better part of the afternoon padding through the house with his shoes off, listening to local radio on the stereo system, or not listening. On occasion, he realized that he'd heard somebody talking about something, and then he'd nod his head accordingly. In the living room of the house, the picture windows were tremendous. Joel often stood before them and clasped his hands behind his back. Then he leaned forward and let his forehead rest against the glass. His skin adhered to the cool surface. His soft exhalations made clouds that spread and diminished. The heat of his breath came back against his face. Standing like that, the house vanished, and Joel saw only the hillside that dropped away below him, cascading downward beneath a layer of thick treetops. At the bottom was a gray lake, a puddle in the canopy. Frequently, Joel could make out boats cutting across the surface of the water. By day, they looked like little black specks. They were easier to spot at night when their headlamps were aglow, as were the lake houses, pinprick stars floating there beneath him. Evenings, Joel left the lights off. The dark poured in. Night was a time for whiskey, and Joel took his slowly, always after a makeshift dinner. With each sip, he let the drink unfold into his sinuses. Between sips, he let the ice shrink in the glass. After a couple hours, he switched on the big television. It squatted in front of the center window, sunk into the carpet like a monument of stone. 55 inches of screen with Joel there, on the chair in front, the decanter of whiskey and a tumbler on the glass beside him. As a working man, Joel hadn't been particularly interested in television, this one he'd purchased for the girls and their Nintendo. But now he found himself staying awake most nights, flipping aimlessly through the channels with the volume on low, paying occasional attention to what he found, content simply to know that something was there to cast light across him. This is how it went for Joel for a long time. One night, he heard his name. Joel. And again. Ahem. Joel. When it happened, he was turned toward the picture windows, looking at his reflection, looking beyond it. The image of himself lit up there, semi-transparent against the vast black sky. The light of the television making chasms out of his creases, the expanse of night, the darkness stretching endlessly away, Joel hovering atop that void, the whiskey glass floating in his right hand. Joel. It came from the television. He'd been punching the changer every 5 minutes or so, landing inadvertently on the current channel before turning his attention to the window. Now he could see that there was a show in front of him. It was a show about a spaceman. The spaceman's name was Joel. That was the same name as Joel's name. Someone was there, saying Joel's name. Someone was calling to Joel, and for that reason, it sounded like someone was calling to him, to Joel, in his chair. The disorientation lasted for a little more than a moment, but it was enough to grab Joel's attention. When they were young, Joel and his brother had wanted to be astronauts. It hadn't turned out that way. Instead, the two young men decided to assemble transistors in the garage, and then the rest of it had happened. The show stayed on for a long time. Joel thought all the next day about the spaceman show, as he moved about the house, as he stood with his hands behind his back, watching black spots crawl along the surface of the lake. He decided that he would look at it again. That night, Joel did not start drinking whiskey until the time came near for the show to begin. To pass the empty hours, he read a book from the shelf. The book was about the Aztecs and their rainforest. They had sacrificed a person every day to make the sun come up. He thought maybe that it had belonged to Justine. Apparently, no one ever told the Aztecs that the sun would come up without all the killing. The Aztecs did not figure it out for themselves until Cortez came along and brought smallpox, and by that point the knowledge was of no use to them at all. When the spaceman program came on, Joel paid it his full attention. Joel was trapped in space. That much he knew. He was on a satellite circling the Earth. He had been put there by scientists. They, the scientists, had made this decision for him without asking. They possessed schemes for destroying Joel and manipulating the human race. Joel's satellite was in bad shape. In fact, it appeared to be made of flimsy stuff, paper and foam, cardboard and wires. Yet, somehow, for now, it stayed together, although all around it remained a vast expanse of outer space. Sometimes Joel was not himself, other times he was. To fill the hours of his exile, he assembled robots. They kept him company. For some reason, they all watched movies together on a big screen. I should assemble robots, Joel said. Joel did not feel old. He did not consider himself to be old. His hair had turned gray, as everyone's does. Some of it had abandoned his head altogether. He took medicine to prevent hypertension, and on occasion his back slipped out of alignment. But he did not feel old. He thought that to start feeling old, just because he lost his job, would mean conforming to some standard of self-pity he simply could not accept. However, yes, Joel felt tired. This he would admit. It was as if he'd been tunneling through rock for a very long time, and then, without meaning to, had broken through the surface, and beyond it discovered an immense, inscrutable void that pulled him ever away from himself. There was emptiness, and there was loneliness. There was a complete lack of knowing what to do. Joel did not have the materials to assemble robots. He knew, however, that he couldn't do it, even if he had. The inventiveness of his garage days was far behind him. Instead, Joel moved the toaster from the kitchen to the glass table where, formerly, he had placed the decanter of whiskey. Then he sat the blender on the carpet to his left. He did not believe that these appliances would start speaking to him. He did not believe anything like that. But what could he say? Their presence felt right. The spaceman was surrounded by his machines. That was how he thought things should be. The movies they sat through were pretty bad, and the robots always had something to say. Joel let them do most of the talking. One afternoon, after some weeks of this, Joel called his daughter, Justine. It took 4 rings for her to pick up the telephone. "Justine," he said. "Oh, hi," she said. "How are your studies?" "Fine, not bad." "And your sister?" "Okay, I think. I haven't talked to her in a couple weeks." For a moment, neither one of them said a thing. "Did you have a reason for calling?" Justine asked. "Joel has been exiled to outer space," he said. "It just came out of him. He's trapped up there in the dark, and he doesn't know how to get back. His ship is made of paper and wires. It could fall apart, just fall apart at any second, and then all that silence will win." There was a pause. Justine said, "Daddy?" "That's all for now, thanks." Joel hung up the phone and walked to the picture window. Briefly, he saw the image of Joel floating there in the glass, and behind him the toaster, the blender, his machines. He clasped his hands behind his back. He stepped forward and set his forehead against the cool window. He breathed out into soft clouds. He saw the gray lake far below him and watched, at that moment, as 2 black specks collided. Thank you.